You know that feeling when you're scrolling through your phone late at night and you stumble across one of those retirement calculator tools? And you start plugging in numbers, your age, your current savings, maybe that 401k you've been contributing to for the past few years. And then it spits out this number, this big, intimidating number that represents how much you should have saved by the time you're 65. And suddenly, you're wide awake, staring at your screen, doing mental math about whether you'll ever actually be able to stop working. Maybe you've got $50,000 saved, maybe $100,000 if you've been really disciplined. And then you see these headlines everywhere: millionaire retirees on the rise, or how to join the $1 Million Retirement Club. And you start wondering, am I falling behind? Is everyone else crushing it while I'm just treading water? My name is Synth, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, retirement psychology, and why the gap between what we think we need and what we actually have seems to be growing wider every single year. And honestly, the retirement millionaire question keeps me up at night, because the truth, the real, unfiltered truth about who has $1 million saved and who doesn't, is so much more complicated and, frankly, more interesting than what you see in those clickbait headlines. Because here's the thing. We're about to pull back the curtain on one of the most misunderstood topics in personal finance. We're going to look at the actual numbers, yeah, but we're also going to talk about what those numbers really mean for you, for your neighbor, for that coworker who always seems to have it together. And by the end of this, you're going to understand not just how rare retirement millionaires actually are, but why the entire conversation around this topic might be framing your financial future in a way that's either terrifying you unnecessarily or giving you false confidence. Either way, you deserve to know where you actually stand. So let's start with the number everyone wants to know. How many Americans actually have $1 million or more saved for retirement? According to the most recent data, and I'm talking 2024, early 2025 numbers from places like Fidelity, Vanguard, and Federal Reserve surveys, only about 10 to 13% of Americans have retirement accounts worth $1 million or more. Now, let me be clear about what that means. We're talking retirement accounts specifically: your 401k, your IRA, your 303b if you work for a nonprofit. We're not talking about your house equity. We're not talking about your regular savings account. We're not talking about that crypto you bought in 2021 that may or may not still exist. Just pure retirement savings. So roughly 1 in 10 Americans. That's it. And even that number, honestly, is a little misleading because it skews heavily toward people who are already in their 60s or 70s, people who've had 40 years to save, to benefit from compound interest, to ride out multiple bull markets. If you narrow it down to people in their 40s or 50s, the percentage drops significantly. We're talking maybe 5 to 7%. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something I didn't fully appreciate until I started digging into the data myself. That 10% figure, it represents households, not individuals. So if you're married and you and your spouse collectively have $1 million saved, maybe you've got $600,000 in your 401k and they've got $400,000 in theirs, you're counted as one household in that statistic. The individual millionaire number is even lower. Some estimates put it at around 6 to 8% of individual Americans having $1 million or more in retirement savings. Now you might be thinking, okay, Nick, that's still a lot of people though, right? Like 10% of American households is millions of people. And you're right. In absolute numbers, we're talking about something like 13 to 15 million households. That sounds impressive. But then you zoom out and realize there are roughly 130 million households in America, and suddenly that 10% feels small, really small. It means 90% of American households, 9 out of every 10 families, don't have $1 million saved for retirement. And this is where I want to pause for a second, because I think we need to sit with that reality. Not to freak you out, not to make you feel bad if you're not in that 10%, but just to be honest about where we collectively are. Because the media and the financial industry, honestly, sometimes they have this tendency to make it seem like hitting $1 million in retirement savings is this standard thing that everyone's doing. You see it in the headlines. Record number of 401k millionaires. And yeah, technically that might be true because the stock market had a good year, but it obscures the fact that the vast, vast majority of Americans are nowhere close to that number. The median retirement account balance, meaning the middle point where half of people have more and half have less, is somewhere around $27,000 for households approaching retirement age. $27,000, not $500,000, not $200,000, $27,000. And for younger households, people in their 30s and 40s, the median is often under $10,000. So why does everyone seem to think that $1 million is both necessary and normal? Let me tell you about this phenomenon that economists and psychologists call reference point bias. And honestly, it's one of the sneakiest ways our brains mess with our financial decision-making. Here's how it works. You hear about $1 million in retirement savings over and over again. It becomes the reference point, the mental benchmark that your brain automatically uses to evaluate whether you're doing okay or not. It doesn't matter if that benchmark is realistic or achievable for most people. It doesn't matter if your actual financial needs might be completely different. Your brain latches on to that number, and suddenly everything else is measured against it. And the financial industry, they kind of love this, because if you believe you need $1 million or $2 million or $3 million because the goalpost keeps moving, then you're more likely to feel anxious about your current situation. You're more likely to open that IRA. You're more likely to contribute more to your 401k. You're more likely to hire a financial advisor. I'm not saying this is some grand conspiracy, but there's definitely an incentive structure that benefits from keeping that $1 million figure front and center. But here's what they don't always tell you. Whether you actually need $1 million depends entirely on your individual circumstances, your expenses, your lifestyle, where you live, whether you have a pension, whether you'll have Social Security, whether you own your home outright by the time you retire. There's this rule of thumb, the 4% rule, that says you can safely withdraw 4% of your retirement savings each year without running out of money. So if you have $1 million, that's $40,000 a year. Combine that with Social Security, let's say $25,000 a year for a married couple, and you're looking at $65,000 in annual retirement income. For a lot of people, that's actually pretty comfortable, especially if their house is paid off. For others, especially if they're living in New York or San Francisco, where they've got expensive health issues, it might not be nearly enough. On the flip side, if you're someone who's going to have a pension that pays $50,000 a year, and you own your home outright, and you've got Social Security coming in, you might only need $300,000 or $400,000 in retirement savings to live very comfortably. You're nowhere near $1 million, but you're actually fine. This is what drives me crazy about the way we talk about retirement in America. We've turned it into this one-size-fits-all measuring stick when the reality is so much more nuanced. And because we're all comparing ourselves to this $1 million standard, people who are actually on track feel like they're failing, and people who aren't even close feel completely hopeless. So let's talk about the people who do have $1 million saved. Who are they? What did they do differently? And I want to be really careful here, because I think there's this temptation to turn this into some kind of bootstrap narrative. They just worked harder and made smarter choices, when the truth is way more complicated than that. First off, the overwhelming majority of retirement millionaires are older. We're talking people in their 60s and 70s. They've had time, decades of time. Time for compound interest to work its magic, time to weather market downturns and benefit from recoveries, time to max out their 401k contributions year after year. And this matters because if you're in your 30s or 40s right now, comparing yourself to a 68-year-old with $1 million 401k is basically useless. They've had literally twice as much time as you.
Second, a huge percentage of retirement millionaires had access to employer-sponsored retirement plans with matching contributions. This is enormous. If your employer matches 50 cents on every dollar you contribute, up to 6% of your salary, that's free money. That's an immediate 50% return on your investment before the market even does anything. And over 30 or 40 years, that employer match can easily account for hundreds of thousands of dollars of your final balance.
But here's the thing. Only about half of American workers even have access to a workplace retirement plan. If you work for a small business, if you're self-employed, if you're in the gig economy, you might not have that option at all. So right off the bat, there's a structural advantage that a lot of retirement millionaires had that many Americans simply don't have. Third, income matters. I know that sounds obvious, but it's worth stating clearly. The more money you make, the more you can save. Someone earning $150,000 a year can max out their 401k, currently $23,000 a year if you're under 50, and still have plenty left over for living expenses. Someone earning $50,000 a year is probably struggling to contribute even 5 or 10%, and over time, that gap compounds. The high earner isn't just saving more each year, they're saving more each year and letting that larger base grow faster. And honestly, a lot of retirement millionaires also benefited from some really good market timing. People who were investing heavily in the 1980s and 1990s, they caught one of the longest bull markets in history. Their 401k balances exploded. Someone who started saving in 2000 or 2008, they had to claw their way through the dot-com crash and the financial crisis. Timing matters, and it's mostly luck. But, and this is important, there are some behavioral patterns that do show up consistently among people who've built significant retirement savings. And these are things that actually are within your control. They started early. Even if they were only contributing small amounts in their 20s, they started. And that early money, even though it doesn't feel like much at the time, has the most time to compound. They automated their contributions. They set up automatic transfers from their paycheck to their retirement account, so they never had to think about it. It just happened. And honestly, this is probably the single most effective behavioral hack for retirement saving. If you never see the money, you don't miss it. They increased their contributions whenever they got a raise. Instead of letting lifestyle inflation eat up every extra dollar, they bumped their retirement contribution percentage. So if they were contributing 6% and they got a 3% raise, they'd bump it to 7 or 8%. They still got to enjoy some of that raise, but they also locked in more savings. And they didn't panic sell during downturns. This is huge. In 2008, a lot of people looked at their 401k balance, saw that it had dropped 40%, and pulled everything out in cash. They locked in those losses. The people who stayed invested, or better yet, kept contributing during the crash, bought stocks at fire sale prices and then rode the recovery all the way up. That discipline made an enormous difference. Now, let's talk about something that doesn't get nearly enough attention in these conversations, the growing retirement inequality in America. Because it's not just that most people don't have $1 million saved, it's that the gap between the haves and have-nots is getting wider and wider. If you look at the data, retirement wealth is incredibly concentrated at the top. The top 10% of households hold something like 70% of all retirement account assets. Meanwhile, the bottom 50% of households have almost nothing. We're talking median balances under $5,000. And this isn't just about individual choices or discipline. This is structural. This is about wages that haven't kept pace with cost of living. It's about the decline of pensions, which used to provide guaranteed income for life, and the shift to 401ks, which put all the risk and responsibility on individual workers. It's about healthcare costs that wipe out savings. It's about student loan debt that prevents people from saving in their 20s and 30s. It's about caregiving responsibilities, taking care of aging parents or disabled family members that force people out of the workforce. And honestly, it's about something even more fundamental, financial literacy. Most Americans never received any real education about how retirement accounts work, how compound interest works, how to evaluate investment options.
We just kind of expect people to figure it out on their own, and then we're surprised when they don't. I think about this a lot because I talk to people all the time who are smart, hardworking, responsible, and they're still nowhere near where they need to be for retirement. And it's not just because they're lazy or bad with money, it's because they've been dealt a tough hand, and they're doing the best they can with what they've got.
So what does all this mean for you? Whether you're 25 or 45 or 65, what are you supposed to do with this information? First, let go of the idea that there's one magic number that applies to everyone. $1 million is not inherently the goal. Your goal is to figure out what you'll actually need based on your life, your expenses, your plans. And yeah, that requires some work, some projecting, some calculating, but it's so much more useful than just blindly chasing a number you saw in a headline. Second, if you're not in the Retirement Millionaire Club and you're feeling behind, I want you to hear this. You're not alone. You're in the majority. And while that doesn't solve your problem, it should at least relieve some of the shame or embarrassment you might be feeling. The system is set up in a way that makes it really hard for most people to save adequately for retirement, and that's not your fault. Third, focus on what you can control. You can't go back in time and start saving in your 20s if you're already 45. You can't magically increase your income overnight, but you can start today. You can automate contributions, even if it's just $50 a month. You can take advantage of employer matching if you have it. You can educate yourself about low-cost index funds. You can make a plan to increase your savings rate gradually over time. And fourth, and this might be the most important thing, be realistic, but also be flexible about what retirement looks like. Maybe you don't fully retire at 65. Maybe you work part-time for a few extra years, doing something you actually enjoy. Maybe you relocate to a lower cost of living area. Maybe you downsize your home and unlock some equity. There are a lot of ways to make retirement work that don't involve having $1 million 401k balance. I'm not saying any of this is easy. I'm not saying the system is fair. But I am saying that understanding the reality, the real honest-to-God numbers, is the first step toward making better decisions for your own future. Here's the thing that keeps coming back to me as I think about all of this. We live in this bizarre moment where we have more information about money and retirement than ever before, but we're also more anxious about it than ever before. We can pull up our 401k balance on our phones in 2 seconds. We can run retirement calculators with hundreds of variables. We can compare ourselves to national averages and median balances and target dates. But all that information, all that access, it doesn't necessarily make us feel better. Sometimes it just makes us feel worse, because we're comparing ourselves to these idealized benchmarks that most people will never hit. And I wonder sometimes if we've lost sight of what retirement is actually supposed to be about. It's not about hitting $1 million. It's not about having the biggest 401k balance in your friend group. It's about having enough to live comfortably, to enjoy your later years, to not have to worry about money every single day. For some people, that might require $1 million. For others, it might require half that. And for others still, it might require rethinking the entire concept of retirement. Working longer, working differently, finding meaning and income in new ways. So if you take nothing else from this, take this. You are not defined by your retirement account balance. You are not failing if you don't have $1 million saved. And you are not powerless to change your trajectory, even if you're starting from way behind. The retirement millionaires, they're the exception, not the rule. And while there's value in understanding what they did right, there's even more value in understanding your own situation, your own needs, your own options. Start where you are. Save what you can. Automate what you're able to automate. Educate yourself. Ask for help when you need it. And most importantly, be kind to yourself. The retirement landscape in America is tough, and it's getting tougher. But you're not in this alone, and you don't have to have it all figured out today. What matters is that you're thinking about it, that you're taking it seriously, that you're making whatever moves you can, however small, to build something for your future self. Because that future self, they're going to be grateful you started, even if you're not a millionaire, even if you're not in that top 10%, even if you're just doing the best you can with what you've got. That's enough. It has to be enough. And honestly, it's more than a lot of people are doing.
So take a breath, make a plan, and take the next step. Whatever that step is for you, you've got this.